So let's say that you have this section here inside your client side and you want to modify a couple of things about it. So we want to change the color of the title that I have here, the subtitle, and the button background. So let's go ahead and take care of those three things and see how we would go about it. So I have two colors here that I want to use, and I'm going to start with the orange color. So because I just want to modify the elements inside this particular section, I am using Brian, by the way. I'm going to be targeting the section ID and then the different elements that are inside the section, which is how I'm thinking that you would go about this as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So this one has a URL slug of about, so I'm going to target the ID of about. And then I'm going to target this title here. I think this one is an H2, if I remember correctly. So let's go ahead and set that orange color for that text here. All right, awesome. Yes, it was an H2, in fact. Okay, perfect. So that one was pretty easy to do. Let's go ahead and take care of this title here. That one is an H3. So I'm just going to copy this and modify the H2. Okay, awesome. We have our H3 colored. And then for the button background, I'm going to use the inspector tool and see what selector I can use to change that background color. So if I wait this for to load, okay, so here I can see that the background color has been applied under this selector over here. So I'm just going to reuse that one, but I'm going to include that about ID just to make sure that I'm only modifying this large button inside this particular section. And I'm going to set that background color to the orange color that I have up here. All right, awesome. So that didn't really take a long time, did it? I mean, this is a fairly small amount of code, so this was really fast. There's not a lot of things that we can do here to improve our timing because it didn't really take that long. However, here's the thing. I know that you're not working just with 14 lines of code. Like, I know that if you've been working with custom websites for your clients for a long time, you're closer to about 1,000 lines of code, 700 if you're being conservative, but normally it's more than 1,000 lines of code because you're just tweaking everything on the side to make the design look super, super custom. So if that's you, then I know that the problem that comes next is that when you have all of these very specific changes added inside your code, even when you have comments to separate sections and to indicate what you're targeting to your future self, you know that when it comes time to change things up because your client requested it or because you just want to change it up and make it look different, it's time consuming having to look through all of those over 1,000 lines of code and looking for the different things that you changed, looking for the same color that you applied to a bunch of different places. So let's just leave it at time consuming because that's what it is. So here's the thing, when you're tired of trying to look for just a very specific value that you just don't remember where you put it, usually what you end up doing is sort of replicating that code or duplicating that code just by typing it up again, adding your new value and setting that thing to important. Now that's a problem because if you start adding importance just because you can't really find the snippet that you wrote the first time, it's going to get very hard to try to replace that thing that you already set to important and the thing that you set in the first place, that value that you set in the first place. So to avoid yourself the headache, to make things a little bit more efficient, to help your future self save time when it's time to make changes, today I want to show you 4 different tips that you can apply to your coding workflow. So let's start with the first one, which is simply grouping selectors. So if you have 2 different elements or more that you want to style in the exact same way, what you can do is instead of adding 2 different snippets or writing 2 different separate snippets for each of the elements, what you can do is group those 2 selectors and apply the property just once. So for example, here I am adding the exact same property and the exact same value to my H2 and to my H3. So what I can do instead of having these 2 bits of code here is just grab the second selector, add it to the first one. You could do it the other way around too. There's no really like an order here to add the different selectors. and then we can remove this bit of code. And as you can see, both the H2 and the H3 still remain colored with that orange color. And then if I disable this, they both go back to that black color, because this snippet that now I have here is just grouping and saying that, okay, so go ahead and color the H2 inside the about section and also the H3 inside the about section. Now there's no limit to how many selectors you can group here. So if there are a lot of things that again are going to be using the exact same property or list of properties, because it doesn't have to be just one, then what you can do is just keep adding commas and keep adding selectors, and then you're going to have everything grouped in the same place. And if you need to change that color in the future, it's going to be much easier because you already have everything that's colored that way, or maybe not everything, but a bunch of the stuff that is colored the same way, you have it in the same place, and so you only have to change that color in one place. So my second tip is to nest your selectors. So the way that nesting works is that you grab something that the different selectors have in common and you use that thing to wrap the elements. So let me show you what I mean by that. So because these three elements belong to the same section, we can see that all three selectors start with the same ID. It can also be a same class, a same type of element, anything. It doesn't really matter. The important part is that it's the same thing for all three or more amount of elements that you have. And then what you do here is that you're going to grab that thing in common and you're going to put it at the top, and you're going to open parentheses here, or curly brackets actually. And then all you have to do is leave the rest of the selector alone inside those curly brackets. So this is basically going to act as a media query. You know that with a media query, what you do is that you add code inside the media query so that the code only applies under that specific condition. Well, in this case, the effect is pretty much the same thing. So basically what you're telling your browser here is that you want to target these elements that belong to this container here. They're a part of this container, however you want to read that, and apply these styles to it. So any H2, H3, or button that is not part of this about element or this about container is not going to get the changes because these elements are being wrapped by that about ID. So this is a really cool trick that you can use in Squarespace. The only caveat here is that you can use it inside the custom CSS window, but you can't really use this nesting inside the page injection sections or the header injection sections or the footer injection sections. So you can just keep this inside the custom CSS window because this is the part of Squarespace that sort of understands this type of nesting. This nesting doesn't really come from CSS itself. It comes from something called less, which is a slight variation of how you write CSS to be able to write less code. So the third tip I have for you is a keyword shortcut. So this is useful when you have a snippet like this where you have two different properties that have the exact same value and you want to be able to change those things faster. So this is especially useful if you have a lot of snippets that are fairly close together and you want to change the value of all of those things a lot quicker. So what you do here is that you put your cursor in front of the value that you want to change and then press the command key. I believe that's the Windows key in PC. And then while holding that key down, what you do is just put your cursor in front of the following value that you want to change in the same place that you added it before. So for example, here I have it in front of the hash symbol. So I'm going to add it here in front of the hash symbol as well. And then with that key pressed, you click again. And then as you can see, now we have two cursors. So you can continue to do this in as many values as you have that you can see here while keeping that key pressed. So once you're done, all you have to do is release the key and you're still gonna have those cursors blinking everywhere where you placed it. And then what you can do is with the same keyboard, just press shift and start selecting all of that value, and then you can remove it all at once or replace it for something else. So for example, if I add here now black, you're gonna see how everything changed to black at once. And then let's say that I want to change that black color for this dark teal. So I'm just going to select this. If you click anywhere else without holding that key, then you're going to get rid of the 2 or more cursors that you created. So all you have to do to create them again is put your cursor back in. It doesn't have to be at the front of the value, by the way. It can be at the end as well. It doesn't really matter. It can be in the middle too if you want to. The important thing is that you add it in the same place everywhere where you want to make the change, so that when you use the right arrow or the left arrow in your keyword to select the entire value, you select the same thing each time, so that when you add the replacement looks the same on all of the different values. So I'm going to change that color. I'm going to create those 2 cursors, and then I'm going to press Shift and then my keyword arrows just to move that selection. And then I'm just going to hit paste. And now I'm going to have that teal color showing up on all of my elements. So this is a really cool way that you're able to modify this type of value. If, again, you have a lot of different snippets that have that same value close together, because you can just look at all of them, just put all of your cursors, do the keyboard arrow thing, and then you can replace a value at the same time. So this is an awesome tip. So for my last tip, I want to show you how you can create variables in Squarespace that can hold the value that you want to use in multiple places, so that you only have to make the change at the very top of your code and everything will be modified at once. So let me show you how we can do that. In the custom CSS window, we can use 2 types of variables. So we can use CSS variables and we can use less variables. So less is what I mentioned before. That is the sort of type of way to write CSS that allows you to create this sort of nesting. So the same as with the nesting thing, you can't really use less variables inside the different page injection sections. So for the individual pages, for the header, for the footer, none of those sections accept less variables, but you can use CSS variables. So I'm going to show you how you can use both. Personally, I prefer to work with less variables, even though they're only accepted in the custom CSS window, at least at the moment, because I find them a lot easier to work with, but it's up to you, whichever you decide to use. So let's start with the less variables. All you have to do, and this is something I recommend doing at the top of the code, is to define your variable. So for example, all you have to do here is just add an @ symbol and then type in any name you want. So for example, I'm going to create a variable for that dark teal color. So I'm going to name this one. Super easy, just make it something that you know what it means. So this one's going to be dark teal color. Very, very straightforward. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that value in there. So just like that, we already created our variable. Now, to be able to use it, all you have to do is use this part over here. So instead of having color with the hex code, we're going to have the color property with the variable name. And as you can see, once I do that replacement, the color is still showing up because this color is equivalent to this hex code that I have up here. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the background color. All I have to do is just paste in my dark teal color variable, and again the color stays put because that's the color that this variable equals to. Now if you want to make that modification, and this is why variables are so useful, you only have to change it at the top of your code, where again I recommend that you keep all of your variables to make this a lot easier for yourself. So all you have to do is change the color here, and now you change the color of everything else. If you change this to red, everything's going to be changed to red. If you set this to any color, you get what I mean. So I'm going to set this back to dark teal color. And just like that, we have our variables applied. So this is super useful for you to start using at the beginning of your projects, so that you have a lot of different variables available, and then once you add them throughout the code, you're going to have a really easy way for you to modify that if you need to in the future. Now let's go ahead and take a look at CSS variables. Now these ones work the exact same way, but they're written differently. So I'm going to disable this one that we have here. And one quick note before we leave these variables, I want to show you this error that you see down here. So if you ever get this, whenever you're writing less variables, or I believe with CSS variables it happens as well, you're going to see that it says variable, and then it says the name of the variable, and then it says is undefined. So this means that somewhere in your code, you added that variable name, but then at the top, you didn't define the value that is available for that variable. So this often happens, and this is why this is super useful. This often happens if you're just typing in the name of the variable and you make a typo. So you're going to be able to see if there is something that is written incorrectly, and then you're going to have to look through the code. That's the only downside of this, that it doesn't really tell you where the variable is. So you have to look through the code to be able to find that and fix a typo. But on the plus side, you're going to know if you made an error in one of the variables. So you're not going to wonder like why the color isn't really applying. It can be something else, but it's not going to be the fact that you didn't define the variable or that the variable is incorrectly, because you're going to have the error if that happens. Okay, so now that I have that in place, let's just ignore that error for now. We're going to create the custom CSS variable, or CSS variable, the custom, I just added that one. So usually what you do here is that you apply the CSS variables to the root of the site. So you type that in like so. And then within these brackets is where you start describing or defining your variables. So in this case, to write a CSS variable, what you need to do is use 2 dashes, and then you add the name of the variable that you want. So for example, I'm going to use here again, dark teal color. And then I'm going to give this the same value from before, and we're going to have that already set. So this is how you create those CSS variables. In fact, let me add something here real quick. CSS variables. And this one's going to be less variables. All right. So that is how you define those variables. As you can see, it's not more complicated, but it's slightly different than less valuable variables. That's why I prefer the less ones better, because it's just faster to do. But in any case, if you want to define more variables, all you have to do is just keep adding them in here. So in here, and then you add the value that you want. You don't have to define root again or point to root again. You just need to add them, like stack them inside that same selector, and then you're going to be able to create as many variables as you want. So now to be able to use them, what you do, and I'm going to copy this name here, what you have to do is add a var like this, and then open parentheses. And then within those parentheses is where you're going to add the variable name, like so. And then let me copy that and add that in here. And just like that, as you can see, we have the teal color showing up again. Now, if we change this for anything else, oops, then the same thing as with less variables, it's going to apply to all the places where you have defined or where you have added that variable that you defined in the beginning. So let's put this back. So before we wrap up, I want to show you really quickly the difference between trying to use less variables inside the page settings, like the injection section of a page, and using CSS variables. So I'm going to go ahead and disable this for the time being. And I'm going to keep these 2 variables available. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to target the title here. So I'm going to target that about H2. And then I'm going to start with the last variable. So I'm going to grab this color over here, and I'm going to go into the code injection section of that page. So this index page here, advanced, and in here I'm just going to add my style tags as normal, and then this is going to be about H2, and I'm going to set the color to that variable. I'm even going to make it too important just to show you. Let's save this. And as you can see, the color does not apply to this. So let's go ahead and change the approach and use a CSS variable instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this variable. Let's go back. Advanced tab. All right, so now I'm going to add this in here. So var, and we're going to add that dark teal color variable. I'm going to remove the important because it's not really necessary. Let's save that. And just like that, now we do have the color applied. So there's definitely a flexibility that CSS variables give you, at least in Squarespace, that the less variables don't. So it's really up to you, whichever you decide to use, but I really recommend that you start using those in your client projects because it's going to save you so much time in the long run. So I really hope that you found today's video helpful, and I'll see you on the next one.